I remember the day I found out my grandson was getting married. It wasn't from him, it was from my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who saw it on Facebook. Eleanor, did you know Thomas is engaged? Such a handsome couple they make. My heart skipped. Thomas, my only grandson, the boy I had practically raised after my daughter passed when he was just 7. The same boy who used to curl up in my lap while I read him stories, who cried on my shoulder after every heartbreak, whose college tuition I had scraped together from my pension and savings. Before I go on, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I'd love to know who's out there, hearing this story with their heart. Are you excited about the wedding? Mrs. Jenkins had asked, completely unaware that this was the first I'd heard of it. I smiled and nodded, the way Black women my age have learned to do when we're hurting, but don't want the world to see our pain. Of course, I said, so excited. That night, I called Thomas. We hadn't spoken in nearly 8 months, not since he'd moved to Chicago for that big corporate job. The calls had become less frequent, his visits home non-existent, but surely a wedding would change that. Surely I would be part of this milestone in his life. Grandma, he answered, sounding genuinely happy to hear from me. It's been a while. It certainly has, I said, keeping my voice light. I heard some news from Mrs. Jenkins today. Something about you getting married? There was a pause, too long a pause. Yeah, he finally said. Alexis and I got engaged last month. I was going to call you, but things have been crazy with work and planning. That's wonderful news, baby, I said, ignoring the ache in my chest. When's the big day? I should request time off from the community center. Another pause. Well, it's going to be small, he said, his voice taking on that tone, the one people use when they're trying to let you down gently. Just very intimate. Alexis's family is handling most of it. They have this country club membership and— I see, I interrupted, not wanting to hear more excuses. Well, even for a small wedding, a grandmother should be there to see her grandson marry, don't you think? Thomas cleared his throat. Of course, Grandma. Let me talk to Alexis and her parents. They're making the guest list and all that. I'll call you back soon with the details, okay? I knew then. I knew from the way his voice trailed off, from the hesitation, from the vague promises. But still, I allowed myself to hope. That's what we do sometimes. Hope against all evidence. To the contrary. The next day, I went to Macy's and found the perfect dress, a lovely lavender ensemble with a matching hat. It cost nearly a month's worth of my Social Security check, but this was my grandson's wedding. My Thomas. I wanted to look my best. You getting all fancy for something special? Asked the saleswoman as she rang up my purchase. My grandson's wedding, I said proudly, running my fingers over the delicate fabric. He's marrying a lovely girl from Chicago. He must be so excited to have his grandmother there, she said, smiling. Yes, I lied. He is. But days turned into weeks, and Thomas never called back with those details. I left messages, sent texts. Just checking in about the wedding date. I'd say casually, as if my heart wasn't breaking a little more each time I had to ask. Finally, after 3 weeks, he called. It was a Tuesday evening. Grandma, he said, his voice somber. About the wedding. I sat down on my sofa, the same, one where I used to read him bedtime stories, and braced myself. We've decided to keep it very small, just immediate family. I clutched the phone tighter. Thomas, I am your immediate family. I raised you. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought we might have been disconnected. I know, Grandma, Thomas finally said, his voice smaller now. But Alexis's parents are very particular. They're paying for everything, and they want to keep the guest list exclusive, just parents and siblings. I see. The words came out calm, though inside I felt anything but. And what did you say when they told you your grandmother wasn't welcome? It's not like that, he said quickly. They don't even know you. It's just about keeping numbers down. The venue is small. Small enough for her third cousin twice removed, but not big enough for the woman who raised you? I hadn't meant to say it, but there it was, the hurt spilling out before I could catch it. Grandma, please, this is already hard enough. Hard. For whom, Thomas? For you? Try standing in my shoes for a moment. I could hear him sigh, that exasperated sound he'd made as a teenager when he thought I was being unreasonable. But I wasn't being unreasonable now, was I? All I wanted was to see my grandson marry. Look, he said, maybe we can have a small reception when we get back from our honeymoon. Just family. You can meet Alexis properly then. A consolation prize. That's what he was offering. A separate but equal celebration because his fiancé's family didn't want an old black woman at their country club wedding. Will her grandparents be there? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Her grandmother passed last year, and her grandfather is in a nursing home, so no. At least he had the decency not to lie to me. I see, I said again, because what else could I say? Well, you enjoy your wedding, Thomas. I hope it's everything you've dreamed of. Grandma, I have to go now. Mrs. Jenkins is expecting me for Bible study. I hung up before he could hear the crack in my voice. That night, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, holding the lavender dress against my body. It was beautiful, elegant, but not flashy, perfect for a grandmother of the groom. I had even found shoes to match and a small purse with a pearl clasp. I'd imagined Thomas seeing me in it, his face lighting up the way it used to when I'd dress, up for his school events. You look like a queen, Grandma, he'd say, even when I was wearing a simple church dress. Now that dress would hang in my closet, unworn, the tags still attached. A reminder of what should have been. The next morning I called Macy's to see about returning it, but the return period had already passed. You could try selling it online, the customer service representative suggested helpfully. No, I said. I'll keep it. Why, I wasn't sure. Perhaps as evidence. Evidence that I had believed in my grandson's love for me, enough to spend money I didn't really have on a dress for an event I would never attend. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my volunteer work at the community center. I tutored children after school, served at the soup kitchen on Thursdays, and helped organize the clothing drive for the women's shelter. I stayed busy, so busy that sometimes I could go hours without thinking about Thomas or the wedding. But then I'd come home, see that lavender dress hanging in my closet, and it would all come rushing back. You need to take that dress out of sight, my friend Wilma told me when she came over for coffee. It's like keeping a photograph of an ex-husband on your nightstand, just hurting yourself over and over. It's not the same, I insisted. Thomas is my grandson, my blood. Blood don't always mean they treat you right, she said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. My own son didn't speak to me for 5 years after I told him his wife was running around on him. Some truths folks don't want to hear. This is different. Thomas and I don't have problems. It's his fiancé's family. They want a certain type of wedding. I couldn't bring myself to say what we both knew, that this certain type didn't include someone who looked like me. Wilma just looked at me over her reading glasses. And Thomas is a grown man who's letting them call all the shots, including whether his own grandmother gets to see him marry. That tells you something important about who he's becoming. Her words stung because there was truth in them. The Thomas I raised would have stood up for me. The Thomas I raised would have said, my grandmother is coming to my wedding, or there won't be a wedding. But perhaps that Thomas was gone, replaced by a man I hardly recognized, a man who cared more about his future in-laws' approval than his grandmother's broken heart. The wedding was set for June 18th. I knew this not because Thomas had told me, but because Mrs. Jenkins's daughter was friends with someone who worked at the country club. A Saturday evening affair, she'd reported back to her mother. Very elegant. The bride's family spared no expense. As the date approached, I found myself growing more restless. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my mind racing with thoughts of what I could have done differently. Should I have been more involved in Thomas's life after he moved to Chicago? Should I have made more of an effort to visit, to insert myself into his new world? Or would that have only pushed him further away? One afternoon, about 2 weeks before the wedding, I was sorting through old photographs for a memory book I was making for the community center's anniversary. In a faded manila envelope, I found pictures from Thomas's childhood, his first day of school, his 10th birthday party, the Christmas he got that bicycle he'd been wanting. In every photo, he was beaming, his eyes bright with joy and innocence. And in most of them, I was right there beside him, older, tireder than I'd remembered being, but present. Always present. I found myself lingering over one photograph in particular. It showed Thomas at his high school graduation, tall and handsome in his cap and gown, his arm around my shoulders. I was looking up at him with such pride it radiated from the paper, and he was looking at me the same way. What had happened to that bond? When had it begun to fray? I carefully tucked the photos back into the envelope, my decision made. I would go to Chicago, not to crash the wedding, I had more dignity than that, but to deliver a gift and perhaps, if I was brave enough, to say what needed to be said face to face. "You're doing what?" Wilma exclaimed when I told her my plan over the phone. "Eleanor, that's a 12-hour drive." "I'll take the bus," I said calmly. "I've already bought my ticket." "And what if he turns you away? Have you thought about that?" I had thought about little else. "Then at least I'll know I tried. I can't sit here wondering, Wilma. I need to look my grandson in the eye one more time." She was quiet for a moment. "You want me to come with you? Moral support?" "No," I said. "This is something I need to do alone." The bus ride to Chicago was long and uncomfortable, my old bones protesting every bump in the road. But I barely noticed the discomfort, my mind too busy rehearsing what I would say when I saw Thomas. I had packed lightly, just a small overnight bag with a change of clothes and toiletries. And of course, my gift for the bride and groom, a handmade quilt I had started when Thomas was in college, intended as a wedding present for whenever that day came. Each square held a piece of his history, fabric from his baby blanket, his favorite childhood t-shirt, his father's necktie, a scrap of my daughter's wedding dress, years of love stitched together by my aging hands. I arrived in Chicago late Friday afternoon, the day before the wedding. The city was vast and overwhelming, all towering buildings and hurried people. I took a taxi to the modest hotel I'd booked. Near Thomas's apartment, checked in, and then sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly unsure. What was I doing here, really? What did I hope to accomplish? I picked up my phone, and before I could lose my nerve, dialed Thomas's number. "Grandma?" He sounded shocked. "Where are you calling from? The caller ID shows a Chicago area code." "I'm in Chicago," I said simply. "I'm staying at the Lakeview Inn on Madison Street." There was that silence again, the kind that said more than words ever could. "You're here? In Chicago?" His voice had risen an octave. "Grandma, the wedding is tomorrow." "I know that. I didn't come to cause trouble, Thomas. I just wanted to give you your wedding gift in person. I made something special for you and Alexis." "You could have mailed it," he said, but there was less conviction in his voice now. "Some gifts shouldn't be trusted to the postal service," I replied. "Could you meet me, just for a little while? I won't take up much of your time." I heard muffled voices in the background, him covering the phone, speaking to someone else. Alexis, I presumed. "Okay," he finally said. "I can meet you for coffee in about an hour. There's a place called Blue Sky Cafe 2 blocks from your hotel, but I can only stay for a little while. We have the rehearsal dinner tonight." "1 hour is all I need," I assured him. "Thank you, Thomas." After we hung up, I opened my suitcase and carefully removed the quilt, wrapped in tissue paper and secured with a ribbon. Then I took out the lavender dress, now slightly wrinkled, from the journey, and laid it on the bed. I wouldn't be wearing it to the wedding, but perhaps in a way, it would still serve its purpose. The Blue Sky Cafe was small and cozy, with large windows that looked out onto the busy Chicago street. I arrived early, selecting a quiet table in the corner where we could talk privately. My hands trembled slightly as I arranged the gift-wrapped quilt on the chair beside me. When Thomas walked in, my breath caught. He looked so much like his mother, my daughter, especially around the eyes, handsome in his tailored suit, clearly coming straight from some wedding-related event. But there was something different about him too, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. "Grandma," he said, bending down to kiss my cheek before sitting across from me. "You look well." "So do you," I replied, studying his face. "Nervous about tomorrow?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "A little, mostly excited. It's been a whirlwind these past few months. A whirlwind I'd been excluded from." The thought stung, but I pushed it aside. I hadn't come all this way to make him feel guilty. At least that wasn't my primary intention. "I ordered you a mocha," I said, gesturing to the cup across the table. "Still your favorite?" He looked surprised. "Yes, actually, thanks." We sat in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of all that was unsaid hanging between us. Finally, I reached for the wrapped package. "I wanted to give you this," I said, placing it on the table. "I started making it when you were in college. Just a little something from me to you and Alexis." Thomas carefully unwrapped the quilt, his expression softening as he realized what it was. He ran his fingers over the squares, recognition dawning as he identified the familiar fabrics. "This is my Superman shirt," he said, pointing to one square, "and Dad's Christmas tie, and—" His voice caught. "Mom's wedding dress. I saved these things over the years," I said quietly. "Thought they might matter someday." He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw my little boy again, the one who used to run to me with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting that I could fix anything. "Grandma, this is incredible." His voice was thick with emotion. "You must have spent hundreds of hours on this." "It gave these old hands something to do," I said with a small smile. "There's love in every stitch, Thomas, for you and for your bride, even though we haven't met." He carefully folded the quilt, his movements deliberate, as if he was buying time before having to meet my eyes again. "About the wedding," he began. I held up my hand. "I didn't come here to make you uncomfortable, Thomas. I understand that. Choices had to be made. I'm sure the venue is lovely, but small, just as you said." A flush crept up his neck. "Grandma, let me finish, please." I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "I raised you to be an honest man, Thomas, so I'm asking you now for honesty. Is it the venue size, or is it because Alexis's family doesn't want me there?" He looked down at his coffee cup. "It's complicated. Life usually is, but some answers are simple. Her parents are traditional," he said finally. "They had a certain vision for the wedding. When Alexis showed them pictures of our family, they saw an old black woman who didn't fit that vision," I finished for him. He didn't deny it. I should have stood up to them more. "I know that. But her father is my boss now, and her family has connections that can help my career. It's not just about the wedding, Grandma. It's about my future." "Our choices always are," I said softly. "Every decision we make shapes who we become." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," I said, opening it to reveal a delicate pearl hairpin. "She wore it on her wedding day, and I wore it on mine. I had hoped your bride might want something borrowed and old." Thomas took the box, his hand shaking slightly. "I don't deserve this." "It's not about deserving," I said. "It's about family. About continuing a legacy of love, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." He closed the box carefully. "I'll make sure Alexis gets this." "Will you also tell her about me?" I asked. About how I taught you to ride a bike in the church parking lot every Sunday after service until you finally got it? About how I worked 2 jobs to send you to that computer camp you wanted to attend? About how I held you every night for months? After your mother died, singing her favorite hymns until you could fall asleep? Tears welled in his eyes. Yes, he whispered. I'll tell her all of it. Good. I reached across the table and took his hand. Because that's who you are, Thomas. You're not just the man in the expensive suit who works for her father's company. You're the boy who grew up in my house, who knows the value of hard work and sacrifice. Don't lose that person trying to become someone else. He squeezed my hand, a tear slipping down his cheek. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I said. But sometimes sorry isn't enough. Sometimes we need to make things right. The hour we had planned stretched into 2 as we talked, really talked, for the first time in years. Thomas told me about his job, about Alexis, who sounded like a lovely girl caught between her love for my grandson and her need to please her. Controlling parents, about the life he was trying to build. And I listened, offering neither judgment nor absolution, just the patient attention I had always given him. When his phone buzzed for the 3rd time, he reluctantly said he needed to go. The rehearsal dinner would be starting soon. Of course, I said, gathering my purse. You shouldn't keep them waiting. We walked out of the cafe together, standing awkwardly on the sidewalk as people rushed past us. My return bus leaves tomorrow afternoon, I told him. I'll be heading back home right around the time you're saying your vows. He nodded, looking conflicted. I wish things were different. They could be, I said simply. Things can always be different if we're brave enough to change them. He hugged me then, holding on tightly like he used to when he was small. I love you, Grandma. I never stopped loving you. I know that, I said, patting his back. Love isn't our problem. It's whether we honor that love with our actions. We parted then, him to his rehearsal dinner, me to my lonely hotel room. I watched his tall figure disappear into the crowd, wondering if I'd accomplished anything or simply reopened wounds that would never properly heal. Back in my room, I carefully hung up the lavender dress again. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to our channel and stay with us for the next story. It's already waiting for you on the screen. Because every story told by a grandmother carries the strength of generations. Click and keep listening. We'll be right here.